Okay, today we're looking at the God perspective. This is a reminder of what we talk about all the time, but I think it's a very important reminder because it's so easy to sort of forget our anchor in the spiritual domain. A lot of times in our times of challenges, particularly, we fall back on old perceptions of what God is and how God might guide us and all of that. And it's important to just keep alive the understanding of our relationship to God. We're all projections of that life, love, power, and intelligence that God is. And this is an intellectual concept. These are words that really don't connect with that. So it's time, we need to take time to make that connection. And especially in times of uncertainty, to remind ourselves through our quiet moments that this presence is here. It's not just an abstraction. It is a living presence, and it is pushing through us. And I have said before, and I stick with this, that all of our sense of dissatisfaction, that only arises because we are more than we are expressing at any given moment. If we feel bottled in, if we feel we are restricted in some way by our life, it's because there is something in us that is unrestricted, and it's saying, let me out. There's more to you than you are behaving as at this moment. And that more, of course, is the soul. It is our soul. It is the essence of who and what we are at the very deepest level. We all have it, and there is not one person who is in my book literally does not have a complete soul. We don't have a complete understanding of the soul, but even that is not a hindrance to the truth that we are already connected with everything we're looking for. And so one of the things we run into is we say, if I'm a complete soul and if God is present, why do I feel the way I'm feeling? And then we might fall back on some of our early training. And I, probably like you, grew up with the idea that God has some very human-like qualities. James, I've always loved this statement from James, the letter of James in the New Testament, because it's a reminder of where we start. It's a reminder of what is true, of the nature of God. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no shadow or variation due to change. Don't think of coming down from the Father of lights as coming down from a place up in the sky. This coming down is a level of consciousness. The coming down is a beam of light into our consciousness when we are thinking something lower than what is true. That this omnipresent light shines all the time, even in our dark moments when the windows of our mind are closed, that light is shining. And this is what it does, it sets a stage for our faith. It opens our faith, the faculty of our faith, to what is true. God is not shining some days and not other days. God is always this light. There is no shadow or variation due to change. And probably most of us have a hard time with this because we see ourselves, our behavior, sometimes we don't consider it up to spiritual par. And so God might somehow this might be retribution, might be some kind of payback or some lesson we need to learn or something that we're going through this problem that we're having in life. And so we give God some very human-like qualities, some very human emotions. But we have to remember God does not have human emotions. And if you kind of look at these pictures of this actress, all of these various emotions that are portrayed here, I think there are 16 of them. I would imagine most of us have visualized God going through these. And usually those emotions, the main emotion is probably anger. Anger at our behavior, dissatisfaction with the way, or disappointment, or whatever. That God's not totally happy with the way we've been acting. So we give God these human qualities, these human emotions. But James didn't do that. He said there's no variation or shadow due to change. God is not an emotional entity. God is constant. God is light. Comparing our relationship to God with our relationship to the sun, we do the same thing. And we're not comparing God to the sun, but the sun provides us with a very good illustration. We're not into sun worship necessarily, seeing the sun as our God like the ancient Egyptians might have. But we have day and night, we have sunny, cloudy, we have summer, winter, we have the sun that is changing. It appears to be changing all the time. But what is the truth about the sun? Does the sun change all the time? Or is it just our relationship to the sun that changes? And so we put that in perspective. We would not ask the sun on a cloudy day to shine a little brighter. The sun is already shining just as bright as it ever will. And, we can break this illustration down by looking at scientific information that says the sun has brighter times and lesser times and all that, but we're not going to go there. But the idea, from the sun's perspective, it remains the same. Our view of the sun is affected by the earth, by our placement of the earth, by our placement on the earth and the earth itself. The sun has never risen, never set. It has only seen one day. Has never seen a shadow. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, think of yourself, just try to imagine yourself as the sun for a moment. You're a source of light, absolute light. So wherever you would look, whatever direction you would look, all you would see is what you're giving off. All you would ever see is your light. If there's something blocking that light, you wouldn't see it. Your light would hit the block, but you wouldn't be able to see the shadow that casts. If you're on the other side of the thing, that the obstruction, then you would see the shadow. So it's perspective. When we say there's one presence and one power in the universe, we're saying there is this light that only shines, and it doesn't have the experience of shadows. It never has ended up in a dank cellar, as I point out on the back of the bulletin. It doesn't have that experience. It only sees what it gives off. And so that's a very important thing, because we would say, well, I think my behavior angered the sun, and that's why it's cloudy today. I was planning a picnic, and I did something, obviously, that made the sun a little bit angry at me, so it's going to pay me back. It's going to maybe rain on my picnic. And we get into this thing. We do it with weather. We do it with God. We do it with a lot of things in nature. I've talked about the volcanoes that erupt, and there was a time when people would sacrifice virgins, to the volcano so it wouldn't destroy their villages and so forth. And what does that accomplish? I think, as I pointed out, all you end up with is crispy virgins. You don't really change the mind of the volcano, because that's a function of the earth. It has nothing to do with human behavior. But we have this tendency to put these human characteristics on nature, and particularly on God. And so that's something that it takes some logical thinking to get our mind out of that. That punishment is somehow associated with light. It's like, could the sun ever say, you've done something that I don't really like, so I'm going to cause a shadow to be cast in your life today? Could that possibly happen? Just think of that logically from the sun's point of view. And if you take God and put God in the place of the Son, in terms of what God is, then it helps you to understand, I'm not being punished for something. The punishment is my interpretation of this action I'm attributing to God. That is punishment. But it's self-punishment. It's self-inflicted. It's a self-inflicted wound. It has nothing to do with the Father of lights, this changeless reality with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. So when I pray for something, that's where I start. That's why we say the one presence, one power affirmation is our foundation. Because you bring your mind to this point. Think of God as that ever-shining sun, and put your thought, put your mind, put yourself in how that would be. If you were the sun, what would you see? What would you experience? You would only experience yourself. You would only experience what you are giving off. You would never experience an interpretation of that. You would only experience that reality of what you are giving off. And what are you giving off? What is the nature of God? God is always giving off life. God is always giving off love. God is always giving off power, intelligence. All of these are the qualities that we are in. In them we live and move and have our being. But we can live and move and have our being in this ever-present light. And we can still lock ourselves in a musty cellar of thought. And we've all done that. But that's where the intellectual side of the mind does play an important part. We remind ourselves, that would be impossible. It would be impossible for God to be punishing me, even trying to get my attention for something that is calling for a change on my part. If I'm not seeing the light, then it's not, I can ask God to give me more light, but God would then say, well, you need to open the shades of your mind. You need to open the blinds. You need to let more light in. I can't give you any more than I'm giving you right now. And that's a pretty powerful statement. If you say to yourself, God is giving me all that God will ever give me at this moment, how can I open myself to that? And that's the power of the prayer that Jesus uttered, the very simple, let thy will be done, not mine. It's a very simple idea. It's just saying, open the blinds. But opening the blinds is the second step. The first step is acknowledge the changeless nature of the God in whom you live and move and have your being. That's the first step. And that's very important to think of when you pray for something, when you ask for something, when you're seeking guidance, when you are seeking prosperity, when you're seeking healing. It's important to act as if that which you are asking for is already present. And you see, that would be the sun. No matter what is going on on this planet, no matter how cloudy it is, no matter what is happening, the sun is still shining. In the middle of winters, the sun, from its perspective, is exactly the same as it is in the middle of summer. We go back and forth. We move closer and we move further away. We literally can't do that, but we can mentally do it and emotionally do it. And that's what we do when we say we need to draw near to God, draw closer to God. You can't literally get any closer to God than you are now. God is coursing through our very veins, nearer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, I think as Tennyson said, one way or the other. It's like we will never be closer, so what's the problem? What is going on here? Why am I feeling separate, and how can I dissolve that sense of separation? So just this intellectual exercise of imagining from the sun's point of view, put yourself in the sun's point of view. What does the sun see? What does the sun experience? It can only see what it is giving off. God can only experience what God is doing, what God is giving off. And so the change that needs to occur is in our relationship to that. Where am I? Am I way out here eclipsed by something else, some fear, some thought of lack of some kind, some fear that things are not going to work out as I hope they do? And so I'm asking God, could you shine just a little brighter? Show me some sign that you're shining brighter, that you're giving me something more than you were giving me just a few minutes ago. But that's impossible. God cannot be any more God than God is right now. So it's our work. That's what prayer is all about, and that's why we emphasize the idea of meditation. Take time to drop all the stuff that you're going through mentally and emotionally. Drop all the asking. Drop all the sense that I need help here. And start with the idea of the one presence, one power, the God perspective. Put yourself in the position of the sun. It is shining. It is giving what it is, 100%. Can't give any more. Doesn't need to. Where am I in this process? Am I receptive, or am I locked in my fear? Have I closed my shades and I shuddering in the darkness of this cold room of fear that I'm in? It's okay if you do that, but you have to acknowledge, you need to acknowledge that you're doing it, and that's the problem. The problem is not God. God is never withheld. God is not punishing you for some ignorant thing you've done. If you're locked in a cold room shivering, how did you get there? Who put you there? That's what I ask myself. And what is the answer? The only answer can be, well, I did it to myself. I willingly walked into this room and I shut myself off from the realization of the God perspective, the one presence, one power. I have, in my low moment, created two powers. I have said there's something working against me, and that something I need help in working back, pushing back. And that help is probably God, and so I'm asking God to do and be something more than God has already been. So if I drop that idea, if I say that's not the way it is, that's not the problem. The problem is I have, through my own thinking, through my own emotion, have put myself in this situation. And I can, therefore, lift myself out of it. And I start by realizing nothing in this universe has changed. God is not changed. There is no anger, there is no fluctuation, no doubt in me, no wishing I'd made another decision and gone a different direction, or, there's no disappointment, no record keeping of all the sins I've committed. That is an impossibility. But because we have a difficult time grasping omnipresence, infinity, we can't grasp it with the logical mind, so we say it must be like something, and we have said God must be like a man. And if he's like a man, then that must mean he has emotions. And, if he cast Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he must have been pretty angry. But these are stories told by human beings. They're trying to get something across to us. See, the garden itself never changed. It was Adam and Eve's actions, and if you believe that, take that literally. They ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Two powers. So they started believing in the power of shadows, light and shadows. And if you believe in the power of light and shadows, your life will be full of light and shadows. Some days you'll have God there as happy as can be with you. Other days you're in a shadow. That's what it means to fall from this perfect environment, this garden. You're not being cast out of something by the action of the garden or the action of God, the action of the sun. You're cast out by your belief in two powers. So if, as James says, that God is changeless, there's no variation or shadow due to change. We come back to that. That's where we start. Okay, I'm having this negative experience. I'm feeling lost. I'm feeling bad. So how do I sort this out? God, please show me a sign. God would say, if God could speak as a human, what else do you want? I'm as bright as I can be. I'm all that you can ever desire and so much more. What more do you want of me? Well, I want you to change my thinking. I want you to do something in me, do something that makes me see that it's safe to change, that it's safe to stop fearing, that it's safe to declare my life is now in divine order. I want you to do something to convince me that you're real. And that would be a little, again, like when I was growing up, we had a cellar under the ground. It was one of these, it was concrete, but it was totally buried. It was just a big hump, and there was an air pipe. And you could be down in that cellar, it would be pitch black. Except when the sun was straight overhead, it would send a little beam of light down to the floor of that musty cellar. And so you knew the sun was out there. So you could sit in that musty cellar, I never did this, but you could, and pray that the sun come and light this cellar up, to bring more light into the cellar. And how would the sun respond to that? It would say, well, I'm doing my best. You've got a little opening there, and I'm giving all I have. But if you want more light, what do you have to do? You have to get out of the cellar. And that's something that is difficult for us to grasp because we feel so lost in our emotional roller coaster ride that we get on sometimes. But what if we start with this idea that the sun is always shining, God is always present right now, no matter how confused I feel. If I'm dealing with an issue of guidance, if I'm dealing with an issue of prosperity, if I'm dealing with an issue of healing, if I'm dealing with an issue of harmony in relationships, if things aren't going so well in some of the relationships I'm having, do I start out by saying, God, give me more of what I think I lack here? That's kind of the old way of thinking. I saw I watched quite a few things on YouTube, and I was watching kind of scrolling around, and there was a huge gathering. I can't remember where it was. I think it was, well, it didn't matter where it was. It was thousands of people at some kind of a revival, huge auditorium. And they were praying, but they were in total anguish, like they were begging and beseeching God to do something different than God had been doing. And there's probably some power in that, but I think it's more psychological than anything, because does all the begging and beseeching in the world that you might do, does that change the nature of something that's changeless? It may make you feel like it does, and that's the psychological plus. But it was interesting just to see that and to think, I wonder what is going through their minds. And I kind of knew what was going through their minds. The more I look like I'm suffering and need help, the more likely God is to come along and help me. But we have to stop thinking that way because it really doesn't help. It may make us feel better. God, I'm a worm of the dust. I'm just worth nothing and worthy of nothing more than to be tread upon. And if I grovel, does it make God respond more? Maybe I believe that. And maybe I don't even know I believe that. If it worked with my mother, it might work with God, But does it work with the Son? Put it in the perspective of something that doesn't change. And what would work in that case? What would work in that case is to acknowledge, yes, there is light. I see the little circle on the floor of the cellar. So I know the sun's shining, but there's something that's missing here. I'm not in it. I'm not enjoying it. So maybe I need to do something. Maybe I need to move out. And we don't move out of the cellar by saying, boy, I'm a total idiot for having come into this cellar and I've just totally beat myself up. I deserve being in darkness because I'm such a fool. We get pleasure out of that also somehow. Does that work? Does that get you out of the cellar? To lament why you're there and how you got there and figure all that out? Well, emotionally, you don't have to figure any of that out. You just acknowledge, if God is law, if we say 1 and 1 is 2, no matter what, no matter who puts 1 and 1 together, you get 2. Doesn't matter if you're smart, if you're dumb, if you are religious, if you're an atheist. It doesn't matter. 1 and 1 is 2. That's law. So we have to think of God in the same way. God is law. God is changeless. God is that shining sun. From the God perspective, there is no change, no variation. God only gives what God is, always. That never fluctuates whatsoever. But if I am not in the path of that shining light, if I'm not in the path of that reality, that's where the change is. Prayer is really about changing yourself. It's a twofold process of affirmation or denial and affirmation. Denial is saying, I now release whatever it is I'm hanging on to that has put me in this mental and emotional state. I now release that energy. And the affirmation is, there is only the sun shining. There is only that reality. And I'm willing to move away from this place I am. I'm willing to let go of the thoughts, the self-perception, the guilt, the fear, the anger. Whatever it is that is keeping me in this place, I'm willing to let it go. And I'm willing to take new action based on what is true of myself at the deepest level. What is true of myself at the deepest level? I'm just like that sun. My soul is just like that sun. It never changes. It never varies. My thought and emotion, my consciousness that surrounds that like a cloudy atmosphere sometimes, that changes all the time. But that which I am at the deepest level, my soul, is absolutely changeless. And it is, in a sense, a miniature sun or a primary beam of the sun, however you want to think of it. The soul doesn't waver. My soul is complete and whole and free at this very moment. So what do I do to adjust my thought to that deeper reality? Think of your center, your soul, as a changeless light, ever shining, unaffected by your beliefs or your changing moods. And that's a challenge to do that. To think, I feel so bad right now. How could I say my soul is whole and perfect? But that, again, is part of your intellectual work. Get back to this idea, envision that sun as your soul. That it is giving off but one thing, absolute good, absolute light. There is no shadow, no variation due to change. It's a shift in perception. And this is really what prayer is about, as I've said many times, derived from the Aramaic word slotha, which means, what does it mean? It means it means to set a trap or to make an adjustment. To make an adjustment. If you're in that dark cellar, see that little circle of sun, why isn't there more sun in my life? What's the adjustment that needs to be made? Prayer is action. It's moving from where you are, mentally and emotionally, to where you need to be, centered in the one presence and one power. This is what John had in mind, I think, when he said, the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. That's your soul. Calls it the light of men, the light of people, the light of everyone. It's that light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I don't care how negative you've been. And again, this is a difficult thing to grasp, because we're so used to thinking of the divine as human, as having human emotion. But that light that you are, has never been influenced by your worst thought, your deepest, darkest, most negative emotion. As hard to grasp as that may be, that's where you start. I have not offended my source, my God, my soul. I cannot offend. I cannot offend to the point of changing how God behaves. But I can free myself to allow myself to experience that deeper reality right here and right now. So commit to opening your mind to the God perspective. Understand your moods change, but God expressing as your soul does not. Very important realization to have. Okay? Thank you for coming out, and we'll see you again next week.